Book 23. A Letter for Pierre. Isabel. Arrival of Lucy's Easel and Trunks at the Apostles. By Herman Melville. Chapter 1. If a frontier man be seized by wild Indians, and carried far and deep into the wilderness, and there held a captive, with no slightest probability of eventual deliverance, then the wisest thing for that man is to exclude from his memory by every possible method the least images of those beloved objects now forever reft from him. For the more delicious they were to him in the now departed possession, so much the more agonizing shall they be in the present recalling. And though a strong man may sometimes succeed in strangling such tormenting memories, yet, if in the beginning permitted to encroach upon him unchecked, the same man shall, in the end, become as an idiot. With a continent and an ocean between him and his wife, thus sundered from her, by whatever imperative cause, for a term of long years, the husband, if passionately devoted to her, and by nature broodingly sensitive of soul, is wise to forget her till he embrace her again, is wise never to remember her if he hear of her death. And though such complete suicidal forgettings prove practically impossible, yet is it the shallow and ostentatious affections alone which are bustling in the offices of obituarian memories. The love deep as death, what mean those 5 words, but that such love cannot live, and be continually remembering that the loved one is no more? If it be thus then in cases where entire unremorsefulness as regards the beloved absent objects is presumed, how much more intolerable, when the knowledge of their hopeless wretchedness occurs, attended by the visitations of before latent upbraidings in the rememberer as having been any way, even unwillingly, the producers of their sufferings. There seems no other sane recourse for some moody organizations on whom such things, under such circumstances intrude, but right and left to flee them whatever betide. If little or nothing hitherto has been said of Lucy Tartan in reference to the condition of Pierre after his departure from the meadows, it has only been because her image did not willingly occupy his soul. He had striven his utmost to banish it thence, and only once, on receiving the tidings of Glen's renewed attentions, did he remit the intensity of those strivings, or rather feel them, as impotent in him in that hour of his manifold and overwhelming prostration. Not that the pale form of Lucy, swooning on her snow-white bed, not that the inexpressible anguish of the shriek, my heart," would not now at times force themselves upon him, and cause his whole being to thrill with a nameless horror and terror. But the very thrillingness of the phantom made him to shun it, with all remaining might of his spirit. Nor were there wanting still other, and far more wonderful, though but dimly conscious influences in the breast of Pierre, to meet as repellents the imploring form. Not to speak of his being devoured by the all-exacting theme of his book, there were sinister preoccupations in him of a still subtler and more fearful sort, of which some inklings have already been given. It was while seated solitary in his room one morning, his flagging faculties seeking a momentary respite, his head sideways turned toward the naked floor, following the seams in it, which, as wires, led straight from where he sat to the connecting door, and disappeared beneath it into the chamber of Isabel, that he started at a tap at that very door, followed by the wonted, low, sweet voice, "Pierre, a letter for thee. Dost thou hear? A letter. May I come in?" At once he felt a dart of surprise and apprehension, for he was precisely in that general condition with respect to the outer world, that he could not reasonably look for any tidings but disastrous, or at least unwelcome ones. He assented, and Isabel entered, holding out the billet in her hand. "'Tis from some lady, Pierre, who can it be?" "Not thy mother, though, of that I am certain." The expression of her face, as seen by me, not at all answering to the expression of this handwriting here. "My mother? From my mother?" muttered Pierre, in wild vacancy. "No, no, it can scarce be from her Oh, she writes no more, even in her own private tablets now. Death hath stolen the last leaf, and rubbed all out, to scribble his own ineffaceable hic jacet there." "Pierre!" cried Isabel in a fright. "Give it me!" he shouted vehemently, extending his hand. "Forgive me, sweet, sweet Isabel. I have wandered in my mind. This book makes me mad. There, I have it now, in a tone of indifference. Now leave me again. It is from some pretty aunt or cousin, I suppose." Carelessly balancing the letter in his hand, Isabel quitted the room. The moment the door closed upon her, Pierre eagerly split open the letter and read. Chapter 2. This morning I vowed it, my own dearest, dearest Pierre, I feel stronger today. For today I have still more thought of thine own superhuman, angelical strength, which so has a very little been transferred to me. Oh, Pierre, Pierre, with what words shall I write thee now? Now, when still knowing nothing, yet something of thy secret eye, as a seer suspect. Grief, deep unspeakable grief, hath made me the seer. I could murder myself, Pierre, when I think of my previous blindness. But that only came from my swoon. It was horrible and most murdersome. But now I see thou wert right in being so instantaneous with me, and in never afterward writing to me, Pierre. Yes, now I see it and adore thee the more. Ah, thou too noble and angelical Pierre, now I feel that a being like thee can possibly have no love as other men love. But thou lovest as angels do, not for thyself but wholly for others. But still are we one, Pierre. Thou art sacrificing thyself, and I hasten to retie myself to thee, that so I may catch thy fire, and all the ardent multitudinous arms of our common flames may embrace. I will ask of thee nothing, Pierre. Thou shalt tell me no secret. Very right wert thou, Pierre, when, in that ride to the hills, thou wouldst not swear the fond, foolish oath I demanded. Very right, very right. Now I see it. If then I solemnly vow never to seek from thee any slightest thing which thou wouldst not willingly have me know. If ever I, in all outward actions, shall recognize, just as thou dost, the peculiar position of that mysterious and ever-sacred being, then may I not come and live with thee? I will be no encumbrance to thee. I know just where thou art and how thou art living. And only just there, Pierre, and only just so, is any further life endurable or possible for me. She will never know, for thus far I am sure thou thyself hast never disclosed it to her what I once was to thee. Let it seem, as though I were some nun-like cousin immovably vowed to dwell with thee in thy strange exile. Show not to me, never show more any visible conscious token of love. I will never to thee. Our mortal lives, O my heavenly Pierre, shall henceforth be one mute wooing of each other, with no declaration, no bridal, till we meet in the pure realms of God's final blessedness for us. Till we meet where the ever-interrupting and ever-marring world cannot and shall not come, where all thy hidden, glorious unselfishness shall be gloriously revealed in the full splendor of that heavenly light, where, no more forced to these cruelest disguises, she too shall assume her own glorious place, nor take it hard, but rather feel the more blessed, when, there, thy sweet heart shall be openly and unreservedly mine. Pierre, Pierre, my Pierre. Only this thought, this hope, this sublime faith now supports me. Well was it that the swoon in which thou didst leave me that long eternity ago, well was it, dear Pierre, that though I came out of it to stare and grope, yet it was only to stare and grope, and then I swooned again, and then groped again, and then again swooned. But all this was vacancy. Little I clutched, nothing I knew. 'Twas less than a dream, my Pierre. I had no conscious thought of thee, love, but felt an utter blank of vacancy. For wert thou not then utterly gone from me? And what could there then be left of poor Lucy? But now this long, long swoon is past. I come out again into life and light. But how could I come out? How could I any way be, my Pierre, if not in thee? So the moment I came out of the long, long swoon, straightway came to me the immortal faith in thee, which though it could offer no one slightest possible argument of mere sense in thy behalf, yet was it only the more mysteriously imperative for that, my Pierre. Know then, dearest Pierre, that with every most glaring earthly reason to disbelieve in thy love, I do yet wholly give myself up to the unshakable belief in it. For I feel that always is love love, and cannot know change, Pierre. I feel that heaven hath called me to a wonderful office toward thee, by throwing me into that long, long swoon, during which Martha tells me I hardly ate altogether 3 ordinary meals. By that heaven I feel now was preparing me for the superhuman office I speak of, was wholly estranging me from this earth even while I yet lingered in it, was fitting me for a celestial mission in terrestrial elements. Oh, give to me of thine own dear strength. I am but a poor weak girl, dear Pierre, one that didst once love thee but too fondly, and with earthly frailty. But now I shall be wafted far upward from that, shall soar up to thee, where thou sittest in thine own calm, sublime heaven of heroism. Oh, seek not to dissuade me, Pierre. Wouldst thou slay me, and slay me 1,000,000 times more, and never have done with murdering me? I must come. I must come. God himself cannot stay me, for it is he that commands me. I know all that will follow my flight to thee. My amazed mother, my enraged brothers, the whole taunting and despising world. But thou art my mother and my brothers, and all the world, and all heaven, and all the universe to me. Thou art my Pierre. One only being does this soul in me serve, and that is thee, Pierre. So I am coming to thee, Pierre, and quickly. Tomorrow it shall be, and never more will I quit thee, Pierre. Speak thou immediately to her about me. Thou shalt know best what to say. Is there not some connection between our families, Pierre? I have heard my mother sometimes trace such a thing out, some indirect cousinship. If thou approvest then, thou shalt say to her, I am thy cousin Pierre. Thy resolved and immovable nun-like cousin, vowed to dwell with thee forever, to serve thee and her, to guard thee and her without end. Prepare some little corner for me somewhere, but let it be very near. Ere I come, I shall send a few little things, the tools I shall work by, Pierre, and so contribute to the welfare of all. Look for me then. I am coming, my Pierre. For a deep, deep voice assures me that all noble as thou art, Pierre, some terrible jeopardy involves thee, which my continual presence only can drive away. I am coming, Lucy. Chapter 3. When surrounded by the base and mercenary crew, man, too long wanted to eye his race with a suspicious disdain, suddenly is brushed by some angelical plume of humanity, and the human accents of superhuman love, and the human eyes of superhuman beauty and glory, suddenly burst on his being. Then how wonderful and fearful the shock! It is as if the sky-cope were rent, and from the black valley of Jehoshaphat, he caught upper glimpses of the seraphim in the visible act of adoring. He held the artless, angelical letter in his unrealizing hand. He started and gazed round his room, and out at the window, commanding the bare, desolate, all-forbidding quadrangle, and then asked himself whether this was the place that an angel should choose for its visit to earth. Then he felt a vast, outswelling triumphantness, that the girl whose rare merits his intuitive soul had once so clearly and passionately discerned, should indeed, in this most tremendous of all trials, have acquitted herself with such infinite majesty. Then again, he sunk utterly down from her, as in a bottomless gulf, and ran shuddering through hideous galleries of despair, in pursuit of some vague white shape, and lo, 2 unfathomable dark eyes met his, and Isabel stood mutely and mournfully, yet all ravishingly before him. He started up from his plank, cast off his manifold wrappings, and crossed the floor to remove himself from the spot, where such sweet, such sublime, such terrific revelations had been made him. Then a timid little rap was heard at the door. Pierre, Pierre, now that thou art risen, may I not come in, just for a moment, Pierre? Come in, Isabel. She was approaching him in her wonted most strange and sweetly mournful manner, when he retreated a step from her, and held out his arm, not seemingly to invite, but rather as if to warn. She looked fixedly in his face, and stood rooted. Isabel, another is coming to me. Thou dost not speak, Isabel. She is coming to dwell with us so long as we live. Isabel, wilt thou not speak? The girl still stood rooted. The eyes, which she had first fixed on him, still remained wide openly riveted. Wilt thou not speak, Isabel? Said Pierre, terrified at her frozen, immovable aspect, yet too terrified to manifest his own terror to her, and still coming slowly near her. She slightly raised one arm, as if to grasp some support, then turned her head slowly sideways toward the door by which she had entered. Then her dry lips slowly parted. My bed! Lay me! Lay me! The verbal effort broke her stiffening enchantment of frost. Her thawed form sloped sidelong into the air, but Pierre caught her, and bore her into her own chamber, and laid her there on the bed. Fan me! Fan me! He fanned the fainting flame of her life. By and by she turned slowly toward him. Oh, that feminine word from thy mouth, dear Pierre! That she, that she. Pierre sat silent, fanning her. Oh, I want none in the world but thee, my brother. But thee, but thee. And oh God, am I not enough for thee? Bare earth with my brother were all heaven for me. But all my life, all my full soul, contents not my brother. Pierre spoke not. He but listened. A terrible, burning curiosity was in him that made him as heartless. But still all that she had said thus far was ambiguous. Had I known, had I but known it before, oh bitterly cruel to reveal it now. That she. She raised herself suddenly, and almost fiercely confronted him. Either thou hast told thy secret, or she is not worthy the commonest love of man. Speak, Pierre. Which? The secret is still a secret, Isabel. Then is she worthless, Pierre, whoever she be, foolishly, madly fond. Doth not the world know me for thy wife? She shall not come. 'Twere a foul blot on thee and me. She shall not come. One look from me shall murder her, Pierre. This is madness, Isabel. Look, now reason with me. Did I not before opening the letter say to thee that doubtless it was from some pretty young aunt or cousin? Speak quick. A cousin? A cousin, Isabel. Yet that is not wholly out of the degree I have heard. Tell me more, and quicker. More. A very strange cousin, Isabel, almost a nun in her notions. Hearing of our mysterious exile, she, without knowing the cause, hath yet as mysteriously vowed herself ours. Not so much mine, Isabel, as ours to serve us, and by some sweet heavenly fancying, to guide us and guard us here. Then, possibly, it may be all very well, Pierre, my brother. My brother? I can say that now? Any. All words are thine, Isabel. Words and worlds with all their containings shall be slaves to thee, Isabel. She looked eagerly and inquiringly at him, then dropped her eyes and touched his hand, then gazed again. Speak so more to me, Pierre. Thou art my brother. Art thou not my brother? But tell me now more of her. It is all newness and utter strangeness to me, Pierre. I have said, my sweetest sister, that she has this wild, nun-like notion in her. She is willful in it. In this letter she vows she must and will come, and nothing on earth shall stay her. Do not have any sisterly jealousy. Then, my sister, thou wilt find her a most gentle, unobtrusive, ministering girl, Isabel. She will never name the not-to-be-named things to thee, nor hint of them, because she knows them not. Still, without knowing the secret, she yet hath the vague, unspecializing sensation of the secret, the mystical presentiment, somehow, of the secret. And her divineness hath drowned all womanly curiosity in her, so that she desires not in any way to verify the presentiment, content with the vague presentiment only. For in that, she thinks, the heavenly summons to come to us lies. Even there, in that, Isabel. Dost thou now comprehend me? I comprehend nothing, Pierre. There is nothing these eyes have ever looked upon, Pierre, that this soul comprehended. Ever, as now, do I go all agrope amid the wide mysteriousness of things. Yes, she shall come. It is only one mystery the more. Doth she talk in her sleep, Pierre? Would it be well, if I slept with her, my brother? On thy account, wishful for thy sake, to leave thee incommoded, and not knowing precisely how things really are, she probably anticipates and desires otherwise, my sister. She gazed steadfastly at his outwardly firm, but not interiorly unfaltering aspect, and then dropped her glance in silence. Yes, she shall come, my brother. She shall come. But it weaves its thread into the general riddle, my brother. Hath she that which they call the memory, Pierre? The memory? Hath she that? We all have the memory, my sister. Not all. Not all. Poor Belle hath but very little. Pierre, I have seen her in some dream. She is fair-haired, blue eyes. She is not quite so tall as I, yet a very little slighter. Pierre started. Thou hast seen Lucy Tartan at Saddle Meadows? Is Lucy Tartan the name? Perhaps. But also in the dream, Pierre, she came with her blue eyes turned beseechingly on me. She seemed as if persuading me from thee. Methought she was then more than thy cousin. Methought she was that good angel which some say hovers over every human soul, and methought, oh methought that I was thy other angel Pierre. Look, see these eyes, this hair, nay, this cheek, all dark, 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 and she, the blue-eyed, the fair-haired, oh once the red-cheeked. She tossed her ebon tresses over her. She fixed her ebon eyes on him. Say, Pierre, doth not a funerealness invest me? Was ever hearse so plumed? O God, that I had been born with blue eyes and fair hair. Those make the livery of heaven. Heard ye ever yet of a good angel with dark eyes, Pierre? No, 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 all blue, 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 heaven's own blue. The clear, vivid, unspeakable blue, which we see in June skies, when all clouds are swept by dot. But the good angel shall come to thee, Pierre. Then both will be close by thee, my brother, and thou mayest perhaps elect. Elect! She shall come. She shall come. When is it to be, dear Pierre? Tomorrow, Isabel. So it is here written. She fixed her eye on the crumpled billet in his hand. It were vile to ask, but not wrong to suppose the asking, Pierre. No, I need not say it. Wouldst thou? No, I would not let thee read it, my sister. I would not, because I have no right to, no right. That is it, no, I have no right. I will burn it this instant, Isabel. He stepped from her into the adjoining room, threw the billet into the stove, and watching its last ashes, returned to Isabel. She looked with endless intimations upon him. It is burnt, but not consumed. It is gone, but not lost. Through stove, pipe, and flue, it hath mounted in flame, and gone as a scroll to heaven. It shall appear again, my brother. Woe is me, woe, woe! Woe is me, oh woe! Do not speak to me, Pierre. Leave me now. She shall come. The bad angel shall tend the good. She shall dwell with us, Pierre. Mistrust me not. Her considerateness to me shall be outdone by mine to her. Let me be alone now, my brother. Chapter 4. Though by the unexpected petition to enter his privacy, a petition he could scarce ever deny to Isabel, since she so religiously abstained from preferring it, unless for some very reasonable cause, Pierre, in the midst of those conflicting secondary emotions, immediately following the first wonderful effect of Lucy's strange letter, had been forced to put on, toward Isabel, some air of assurance and understanding concerning its contents. Yet at bottom, he was still a prey to all manner of devouring mysteries. Soon now, as he left the chamber of Isabel, these mysteriousnesses remastered him completely, and as he mechanically sat down in the dining-room chair, gently offered him by Delhi, for the silent girl saw that some strangeness that sought stillness was in him. Pierre's mind was revolving how it was possible, or any way conceivable, that Lucy should have been inspired with such seemingly wonderful presentiments of something assumed, or disguising, or non-substantial, somewhere and somehow, in his present most singular apparent position in the eye of world. The wild words of Isabel yet rang in his ears. It were an outrage upon all womanhood to imagine that Lucy, however yet devoted to him in her hidden heart, should be willing to come to him, so long as she supposed, with the rest of the world, that Pierre was an ordinarily married man. But how, what possible reason, what possible intimation could she have had to suspect the contrary, or to suspect anything unsound? For neither at this present time, nor at any subsequent period, did Pierre, or could Pierre, possibly imagine that in her marvelous presentiments of love she had any definite conceit of the precise nature of the secret which so unrevealingly and enchantedly wrapped him. But a peculiar thought passingly recurred to him here. Within his social recollections there was a very remarkable case of a youth, who, while all but affianced to a beautiful girl, one returning his own throbbings with incipient passion, became somehow casually and momentarily betrayed into an imprudent manifested tenderness toward a second lady, or else, that second lady's deeply concerned friends caused it to be made known to the poor youth that such committal tenderness toward her he had displayed, nor had it failed to exert its natural effect upon her. Certain it is, this second lady drooped and came nigh to dying, all the while raving of the cruel infidelity of her supposed lover, so that those agonizing appeals, from so really lovely a girl, that seemed dying of grief for him, at last so moved the youth, that, morbidly disregardful of the fact, that inasmuch as two ladies claimed him, The prior lady had the best title to his hand. His conscience insanely upbraided him concerning the second lady. He thought that eternal woe would surely overtake him both here and hereafter if he did not renounce his first love, terrible as the effort would be both to him and her, and wed with the second lady, which he accordingly did, while, through his whole subsequent life, delicacy and honor toward his thus wedded wife forbade that by explaining to his first love how it was with him in this matter, he should tranquilize her heart, and therefore, in her complete ignorance, she believed that he was willfully and heartlessly false to her, and so came to a lunatic's death on his account. This strange story of real life, Pierre knew to be also familiar to Lucy, for they had several times conversed upon it, and the first love of the demented youth had been a schoolmate of Lucy's, and Lucy had counted upon standing up with her as bridesmaid. Now, the passing idea was self-suggested to Pierre, whether into Lucy's mind some such conceit as this, concerning himself and Isabel, might not possibly have stolen. But then again such a supposition proved wholly untenable in the end, for it did by no means suffice for a satisfactory solution of the absolute motive of the extraordinary proposed step of Lucy, nor indeed by any ordinary law of propriety did it at all seem to justify that step. Therefore he knew not what to think, hardly what to dream. Wonders, nay, downright miracles and no less were sung about love. But here was the absolute miracle itself, the outacted miracle. For infallibly certain he inwardly felt that whatever her strange conceit, whatever her enigmatical delusion, whatever her most secret and inexplicable motive, still Lucy in her own virgin heart remained transparently immaculate, without shadow of flaw or vein. Nevertheless, what inconceivable conduct this was in her, which she in her letter so passionately proposed. Altogether, it amazed him. It confounded him. Now that vague, fearful feeling stole into him, that, rail as all atheists will, there is a mysterious, inscrutable divineness in the world, a God, a being positively present everywhere. Nay, he is now in this room. The air did part when I here sat down. I displaced the spirit then, condensed it a little off from this spot. He looked apprehensively around him. He felt overjoyed at the sight of the humanists of Delhi. While he was thus plunged into this mysteriousness, a knock was heard at the door. Delhi hesitatingly rose. "Shall I let anyone in, sir?" "I think it is Mr. Milthorpe's knock." "Go and see. Go and see," said Pierre vacantly. The moment the door was opened, Milthorpe, for it was he, catching a glimpse of Pierre's seated form, brushed past Delhi, and loudly entered the room. "Ha, ha! Well, my boy! How comes on the Inferno? That is it you are writing. One is apt to look black while writing Infernos. You always loved Dante. My lad, I have finished 10 metaphysical treatises, argued 5 cases before the court, attended all our society's meetings, accompanied our great professor, Monsieur Valvun, the lecturer, through his circuit in the philosophical saloons, sharing all the honors of his illustrious triumph. And by the way, let me tell you, Valvun secretly gives me even more credit than is my due. For 'pon my soul, I did not help write more than 1/2 at most of his lectures. Edited anonymously, though a learned, scientific work on the precise cause of the modifications in the undulatory motion in waves. A posthumous work of a poor fellow fine lad he was, too, a friend of mine. Yes, here I have been doing all this, while you still are hammering away at that one poor plaguey Inferno. Oh, there's a secret in dispatching these things. Patience, patience. You will yet learn the secret. Time. I can't teach it to you, my boy, but time can. I wish I could, but I can't. There was another knock at the door. "Oh!" cried Milthorpe, suddenly turning round to it. "I forgot, my boy. I came to tell you that there is a porter with some queer things, inquiring for you. I happened to meet him downstairs in the corridors, and I told him to follow me up. I would show him the road. Here he is. Let him in, good Delhi, my girl." Thus far, the rattlings of Milthorpe, if producing any effect at all, had but stunned the averted Pierre. But now he started to his feet. A man with his hat on stood in the door, holding an easel before him. "Is this Mr. Glendinning's room, gentlemen?" "Oh, come in, cried Milthorpe. "All right. Oh, is that you, sir? Well, then." And the man set down the easel. "Well, my boy, exclaimed Milthorpe to Pierre. "You are in the Inferno dream yet. Look, that's what people call an easel, my boy. An easel, not a weasel. You look at it as though you thought it a weasel. Come. Wake up, wake up. You ordered it, I suppose, and here it is. Going to paint and illustrate the Inferno, as you go along, I suppose. Well, my friends tell me it is a great pity my own things ain't illustrated. But I can't afford it. There now is that hymn to the Niger, which I threw into a pigeonhole a year or two ago. That would be fine for illustrations." "Is it for Mr. Glendinning you inquire?" said Pierre now in a slow, icy tone to the porter. "Mr. Glendinning, sir." "All right, ain't it?" "Perfectly," said Pierre mechanically, and casting another strange, rapt, bewildered glance at the easel. "But something seems strangely wanting here. Now I see it. Villain! The vines! Thou hast torn the green heartstrings. Thou hast but left the cold skeleton of the sweet arbor wherein she once nestled. Thou besotted, heartless hind and fiend! Dost thou so much as dream in thy shriveled liver of the eternal mischief thou hast done? Restore thou the green vines. Untrample them, thou accursed! Oh my God! My God! Trampled vines pounded and crushed in all fibers. How can they live over again, even though they be replanted? Curse thee, thou! Nay, nay, he added moodily. I was but wandering to myself. Then rapidly and mockingly, Pardon, pardon, porter. I most humbly crave thy most haughty pardon. Then imperiously, Come, stir thyself, man. Thou hast more below. Bring all up. As the astounded porter turned, he whispered to Milthorpe, Is he safe? Shall I bring him? Oh, certainly, smiled Milthorpe. I'll look out for him. He's never really dangerous when I'm present. There go. 2 trunks now followed with L.T. blurredly marked upon the ends. Is that all, my man? Said Pierre, as the trunks were being put down before him. Well, how much? That moment his eyes first caught the blurred letters. Prepaid, sir. But no objection to more. Pierre stood mute and unmindful, still fixedly eyeing the blurred letters. His body contorted, and one side drooping, as though that moment halfway down stricken with a paralysis, and yet unconscious of the stroke. His 2 companions momentarily stood motionless in those respective attitudes, in which they had first caught sight of the remarkable change that had come over him. But, as if ashamed of having been thus affected, Milthorpe, summoning a loud, merry voice, advanced toward Pierre, and tapping his shoulder, cried, wake up, my boy! He says he is prepaid, but no objection to more. Prepaid. What's that? Go, and jabber to apes. A curious young gentleman, is he not? Said Milthorpe lightly to the porter. Look you, my boy, I'll repeat. He says he's prepaid, but no objection to more. Ah! Take that then, said Pierre, vacantly putting something into the porter's hand. And what shall I do with this, sir? Said the porter, staring. Drink a health, but not mine. That were mockery. With a key, sir? This is a key you gave me. Ah! Well, you at least shall not have the thing that unlocks me. Give me the key and take this. Aye. Here's the chink. Thank ye, sir, thank ye. This'll drink. I ain't called a porter for nothing. Stout's the word. 2151 is my number. Any jobs, call on me. Do you ever cart a coffin, my man? Said Pierre. "'Pon my soul, cried Milthorpe, gaily laughing. If you ain't writing an inferno then, but never mind. Porter, this gentleman is under medical treatment at present. You had better, you understand. Squatulate, porter. There, my boy, he is gone. I understand how to manage these fellows. There's a trick in it, my boy. An off-handed sort of what d'ye call it? You understand, the trick. The whole world's a trick. Know the trick of it, all's right. Don't know, all's wrong. Ha! The porter is gone then? Said Pierre calmly. Well, Mr. Milthorpe, you will have the goodness to follow him. Rare joke. Admirable. Good morning, sir. Ha! And with his unruffleable hilariousness, Milthorpe quitted the room. But hardly had the door closed upon him, nor had he yet removed his hand from its outer knob, when suddenly it swung half open again, and thrusting his fair curly head within, Milthorpe cried, "By the way, my boy, I have a word for you. You know that greasy fellow who has been dunning you so of late? Well, be at rest there, he's paid. I was suddenly made flush yesterday. Regular flood tide. You can return it any day, you know, no hurry. That's all. But, by the way, as you look as though you were going to have company here, just send for me in case you want to use me. Any bedstead to put up or heavy things to be lifted about. Don't you and the women do it now, mind. That's all again. Adios, my boy. Take care of yourself." "Stay!" cried Pierre, reaching forth one hand, but moving neither foot. "Stay!" In the midst of all his prior emotions struck by these singular traits in Milthorpe. But the door was abruptly closed, and singing F.A. la la, Milthorpe in his seedy coat went tripping down the corridor. "Plus heart, minus head," muttered Pierre, his eyes fixed on the door. Now, by heaven! The God that made Milthorpe was both a better and a greater than the God that made Napoleon or Byron. Plus head, minus heart, pa. The brains grow maggoty without a heart. But the heart's the preserving salt itself, and can keep sweet without the head. Deli. "Sir, my cousin Miss Tartan is coming here to live with us." "Deli? That easel. Those trunks are hers." "Good heavens! Coming here? Your cousin? Miss Tartan?" "Yes, I thought you must have heard of her and me. But it was broken off, Deli." "Sir? Sir, I have no explanation, Deli. And from you, I must have no amazement. My cousin, mind my cousin Miss Tartan is coming to live with us. The next room to this on the other side there is unoccupied. That room shall be hers. You must wait upon her, too, Deli." "Certainly, sir, certainly. I will do anything," said Deli, trembling. But, does Mrs. Glendinning, does my mistress know this?" "My wife knows all," said Pierre sternly. "I will go down and get the key of the room, and you must sweep it out." "What is to be put into it, sir?" said Deli. "Miss Tartan, why, she is used to all sorts of fine things. Rich carpets, wardrobes, mirrors, curtains. Why? Look," said Pierre, touching an old rug with his foot. "Here is a bit of carpet. Drag that into her room. Here is a chair, put that in, and for a bed, I, he muttered to himself. "I have made it for her, and she ignorantly lies on it now, as maids so lie. Oh God! Hark! My mistress is calling," cried Deli, moving toward the opposite room. "Stay!" cried Pierre, grasping her shoulder. "If both called at one time from these opposite chambers, and both were swooning, which door would you first fly to?" The girl gazed at him uncomprehendingly and affrighted a moment, and then said, "This one, sir," out of mere confusion perhaps, putting her hand on Isabel's latch. "It is well. Now go." He stood in an intent, unchanged attitude till Deli returned. "How is my wife now?" Again startled by the peculiar emphasis placed on the magical word wife, Deli, who had long before this been occasionally struck with the infrequency of his using that term. She looked at him perplexedly and said half unconsciously, "Your wife, sir? Aye, is she not? God grant that she be. Oh, 'tis most cruel to ask that of poor Deli, sir. Tut for thy tears. Never deny it again then. I swear to heaven, she is." With these wild words, Pierre seized his hat and departed the room, muttering something about bringing the key of the additional chamber. As the door closed on him, Deli dropped on her knees. She lifted her head toward the ceiling, but dropped it again, as if tyrannically awed downward, and bent it low over, till her whole form tremulously cringed to the floor. "God that made me, and that wast not so hard to me as wicked Deli deserved. God that made me, I pray to thee, ward it off from me if it be coming to me. Be not deaf to me. These stony walls, thou canst hear through them. Pity, pity, mercy, my God. If they are not married, if I, penitentially seeking to be pure, am now but the servant to a greater sin than I myself committed, then pity, 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 pity. O God that made me, see me here. What can Deli do? If I go hence, none will take me in but villains. If I stay, then, for stay I must, and they be not married. Then pity, 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 pity. Book 24. Lucy at the Apostles by Herman Melville. Chapter 1. Next morning, the recently appropriated room adjoining on the other side of the dining room presented a different aspect from that which met the eye of Delhi upon first unlocking it with Pierre on the previous evening. 2 squares of faded carpeting of different patterns covered the middle of the floor, leaving, toward the surbase, a wide, blank margin around them. A small glass hung in the pier. Beneath that, a little stand with a foot or two of carpet before it. In one corner was a cot, neatly equipped with bedding. At the outer side of the cot, another strip of carpeting was placed. Lucy's delicate feet should not shiver on the naked floor. Pierre, Isabel, and Delhi were standing in the room. Isabel's eyes were fixed on the cot. "I think it will be pretty cozy now," said Delhi, palely glancing all round, and then adjusting the pillow anew. "There is no warmth, though," said Isabel. "Pierre, there is no stove in the room. She will be very cold. The pipe, can we not send it this way?" And she looked more intently at him than the question seemed to warrant. "Let the pipe stay where it is, Isabel," said Pierre, answering her own pointed gaze. "The dining-room door can stand open. She never liked sleeping in a heated room. Let all be, it is well. But there is a grate here, I see. I will buy coals." "Yes, yes, that can be easily done. A little fire of a morning, the expense will be nothing. Stay, we will have a little fire here now for a welcome. She shall always have fire." "Better change the pipe, Pierre," said Isabel. "That will be permanent and save the coals." "It shall not be done, Isabel. Doth not that pipe and that warmth go into thy room? Shall I rob my wife, good Delhi, even to benefit my most devoted and true-hearted cousin?" "Oh, I should say not, sir. Not at all," said Delhi hysterically. A triumphant fire flashed in Isabel's eye. Her full bosom arched out, but she was silent. "She may be here now at any moment, Isabel," said Pierre. "Come, we will meet her in the dining-room. That is our reception place, thou knowest." So the 3 went into the dining-room. Chapter 2. They had not been there long when Pierre, who had been pacing up and down, suddenly paused, as if struck by some laggard thought, which had just occurred to him at the 11th hour. First he looked toward Delhi, as if about to bid her quit the apartment, while he should say something private to Isabel. But as if, on a second thought, holding the contrary of this procedure most advisable, he, without preface, at once addressed Isabel in his ordinary conversational tone, so that Delhi could not but plainly hear him, whether she would or no. "My dear Isabel, though, as I said to thee before, my cousin, Miss Tartan, that strange and willful nun-like girl, is at all hazards mystically resolved to come and live with us, yet it must be quite impossible that her friends can approve in her such a singular step. A step even more singular, Isabel, than thou, in thy unsophisticatedness, canst at all imagine. I shall be immensely deceived if they do not, to their very utmost, strive against it. Now what I am going to add may be quite unnecessary, but I cannot avoid speaking it, for all that." Isabel with empty hands sat silent, but intently and expectantly eyeing him, while behind her chair, Delhi was bending her face low over her knitting, which she had seized so soon as Pierre had begun speaking, and with trembling fingers was nervously twitching the points of her long needles. It was plain that she awaited Pierre's accents with hardly much less eagerness than Isabel. Marking well this expression in Delhi, and apparently not unpleased with it, Pierre continued, but by no slightest outward tone or look seemed addressing his remarks to anyone but Isabel. "Now what I mean, dear Isabel, is this. If that very probable hostility on the part of Miss Tartan's friends to her fulfilling her strange resolution, if any of that hostility should chance to be manifested under thine eye, then thou certainly wilt know how to account for it, and as certainly wilt draw no inference from it in the minutest conceivable degree involving anything sinister in me. No, I am sure thou wilt not, my dearest Isabel. For, understand me, regarding this strange mood in my cousin as a thing wholly above my comprehension, and indeed regarding my poor cousin herself as a rapt enthusiast in some wild mystery utterly unknown to me, and unwilling ignorantly to interfere in what almost seems some supernatural thing, I shall not repulse her coming, however violently her friends may seek to stay it. I shall not repulse, as certainly as I have not invited. But a neutral attitude sometimes seems a suspicious one. Now what I mean is this. Let all such vague suspicions of me, if any, be confined to Lucy's friends. But let not such absurd misgivings come near my dearest Isabel, to give the least uneasiness. Isabel, tell me, have I not now said enough to make plain what I mean? Or, indeed, is not all I have said wholly unnecessary? Seeing that when one feels deeply conscientious, one is often apt to seem superfluously, and indeed unpleasantly and unbeseemingly scrupulous? Speak, my own Isabel. And he stepped nearer to her, reaching forth his arm. Thy hand is the caster's ladle, Pierre, which holds me entirely fluid. Into thy forms and slightest moods of thought, thou pourest me, and I there solidify to that form, and take it on, and thenceforth wear it, till once more thou mouldest me anew. If what thou tellest me be thy thought, then how can I help its being mine, my Pierre? The gods made thee of a holy day, when all the common world was done, and shaped thee leisurely in elaborate hours, thou paragon. So saying, in a burst of admiring love and wonder, Pierre paced the room, while Isabel sat silent, leaning on her hand, and half-veiled with her hair. Deli's nervous stitches became less convulsive. She seemed soothed. Some dark and vague conceit seemed driven out of her by something either directly expressed by Pierre, or inferred from his expressions. Chapter 3. Pierre, Pierre. Quick, quick. They are dragging me back. Oh, quick, dear Pierre. What is that? Swiftly cried Isabel, rising to her feet, and amazedly glancing toward the door leading into the corridor. But Pierre darted from the room, prohibiting anyone from following him. Halfway down the stairs, a slight, airy, almost unearthly figure was clinging to the baluster, and two young men, one in naval uniform, were vainly seeking to remove the two thin white hands without hurting them. They were Glen Stanley and Frederick, the elder brother of Lucy. In a moment, Pierre's hands were among the rest. "Villain! Damn thee!" cried Frederick, and letting go the hand of his sister, he struck fiercely at Pierre. But the blow was intercepted by Pierre. "Thou hast bewitched, thou damned juggler, the sweetest angel. Defend thyself." "Nay, nay," cried Glen, catching the drawn rapier of the frantic brother, and holding him in his powerful grasp. "He is unarmed. This is no time or place to settle our feud with him. Thy sister, sweet Lucy. Let us save her first, and then what thou wilt. Pierre Glendinning, if thou art but the little finger of a man, begone with thee from hence. Thy depravity, thy pollutedness, is that of a fiend. Thou canst not desire this thing. The sweet girl is mad." Pierre stepped back a little, and looked palely and haggardly at all three. "I render no accounts. I am what I am. This sweet girl, this angel whom ye two defile by your touches. She is of age by the law. She is her own mistress by the law. And now, I swear she shall have her will. Unhand the girl. Let her stand alone. See, she will faint. Let her go, I say." And again his hands were among them. Suddenly, as they all, for the one instant vaguely struggled, the pale girl drooped and fell sideways toward Pierre. And unprepared for this, the two opposite champions unconsciously relinquished their hold, tripped, and stumbled against each other, and both fell on the stairs. Snatching Lucy in his arms, Pierre darted from them, gained the door, drove before him Isabel and Deli, who, affrighted, had been lingering there, and bursting into the prepared chamber laid Lucy on her cot, then swiftly turned out of the room and locked them all three in, and so swiftly, like lightning, was this whole thing done, that not till the lock clicked did he find Glen and Frederick fiercely fronting him. "Gentlemen, it is all over. This door is locked. She is in women's hands. Stand back." As the two infuriated young men now caught at him to hurl him aside, several of the apostles rapidly entered, having been attracted by the noise. "Drag them off from me," cried Pierre. "They are trespassers. Drag them off." Immediately Glen and Frederick were pinioned by 20 hands, and, in obedience to a sign from Pierre, were dragged out of the room and dragged downstairs, and given into the custody of a passing officer, as two disorderly youths invading the sanctuary of a private retreat. In vain they fiercely expostulated. But at last, as if now aware that nothing farther could be done without some previous legal action, they most reluctantly and chafingly declared themselves ready to depart. Accordingly they were let go, but not without a terrible menace of swift retribution directed to Pierre. Chapter 4. Happy is the dumb man in the hour of passion. He makes no impulsive threats, and therefore seldom falsifies himself in the transition from choler to calm. Proceeding into the thoroughfare, after leaving the apostles, it was not very long ere Glenn and Frederick concluded between themselves that Lucy could not so easily be rescued by threat or force. The pale, inscrutable determinateness and flinchless intrepidity of Pierre now began to domineer upon them. For any social unusualness or greatness is sometimes most impressive in the retrospect. What Pierre had said concerning Lucy's being her own mistress in the eye of the law, this now recurred to them. After much tribulation of thought, the more collected Glenn proposed that Frederick's mother should visit the rooms of Pierre. He imagined that though insensible to their own united intimidations, Lucy might not prove deaf to the maternal prayers. Had Mrs. Tartan been a different woman than she was, had she indeed any disinterested agonies of a generous heart, and not mere matchmaking mortifications, however poignant, then the hope of Frederick and Glenn might have had more likelihood in it. Nevertheless, the experiment was tried, but signally failed. In the combined presence of her mother, Pierre, Isabel, and Delly, and addressing Pierre and Isabel as Mr. and Mrs. Glendinning, Lucy took the most solemn vows upon herself to reside with her present host and hostess until they should cast her off. In vain her by turns suppliant and exasperated mother went down on her knees to her, or seemed almost on the point of smiting her. In vain she painted all the scorn and the loathing, sideways hinted of the handsome and gallant Glenn, threatened her that in case she persisted, her entire family would renounce her, and though she should be starving, would not bestow one morsel upon such a recreant, and infinitely worse than dishonorable girl. To all this Lucy, now entirely unmenaced in person, replied in the gentlest and most heavenly manner, yet with a collectedness and steadfastness from which there was nothing to hope. What she was doing was not of herself. She had been moved to it by all-encompassing influences above, around, and beneath. She felt no pain for her own condition. Her only suffering was sympathetic. She looked for no reward. The essence of well-doing was the consciousness of having done well without the least hope of reward. Concerning the loss of worldly wealth and sumptuousness, and all the brocaded applauses of drawing-rooms, these were no loss to her, for they had always been valueless. Nothing was she now renouncing, but in acting upon her present inspiration she was inheriting everything. Indifferent to scorn, she craved no pity. As to the question of her sanity, that matter she referred to the verdict of angels, and not to the sordid opinions of man. If anyone protested that she was defying the sacred counsels of her mother, she had nothing to answer but this, that her mother possessed all her daughterly deference, but her unconditional obedience was elsewhere due. Let all hope of moving her be immediately, and once for all, abandoned. One only thing could move her, and that would only move her to make her forever immovable. That thing was death. Such wonderful strength in such wonderful sweetness, such inflexibility in one so fragile, would have been matter for marvel to any observer. But to her mother it was very much more. For, like many other superficial observers, forming her previous opinion of Lucy upon the slightness of her person, and the dulcetness of her temper, Mrs. Tartan had always imagined that her daughter was quite incapable of any such daring act. As if sterling heavenliness were incompatible with heroicness. These two are never found apart. Nor, though Pierre knew more of Lucy than anyone else, did this most singular behavior in her fail to amaze him. Seldom even had the mystery of Isabel fascinated him more, with a fascination partaking of the terrible. The mere bodily aspect of Lucy, as changed by her more recent life, filled him with the most powerful and novel emotions. That unsullied complexion of bloom was now entirely gone, without being any way replaced by sallowness, as is usual in similar instances. And as if her body indeed were the temple of God, and marble indeed were the only fit material for so holy a shrine, A brilliant, supernatural whiteness now gleamed in her cheek. Her head sat on her shoulders as a chiseled statue's head, and the soft, firm light in her eye seemed as much a prodigy, as though a chiseled statue should give token of vision and intelligence. Isabel also was most strangely moved by this sweet unearthliness in the aspect of Lucy. But it did not so much persuade her by any common appeals to her heart, as irrespectively commend her by the very signet of heaven. In the deference with which she ministered to Lucy's little occasional wants, there was more of blank spontaneousness than compassionate voluntariness. And when it so chanced that, owing perhaps to some momentary jarring of the distant and lonely guitar, as Lucy was so mildly speaking in the presence of her mother, a sudden, just audible, submissively answering musical string tone came through the open door from the adjoining chamber. Then Isabel, as if seized by some spiritual awe, fell on her knees before Lucy and made a rapid gesture of homage. Yet still, somehow, as it were, without evidence of voluntary will. Finding all her most ardent efforts ineffectual, Mrs. Tartan now distressedly motioned to Pierre and Isabel to quit the chamber, that she might urge her entreaties and menaces in private. But Lucy gently waved them to stay, and then turned to her mother. Henceforth she had no secrets but those which would also be secrets in heaven. Whatever was publicly known in heaven should be publicly known on earth. There was no slightest secret between her and her mother. Wholly confounded by this inscrutableness of her so alienated and infatuated daughter, Mrs. Tartan turned inflamedly upon Pierre, and bade him follow her forth. But again Lucy said nay, there were no secrets between her mother and Pierre. She would anticipate everything there. Calling for pen and paper, and a book to hold on her knee and write, she traced the following lines, and reached them to her mother. I am Lucy Tartan. I have come to dwell during their pleasure with Mr. and Mrs. Pierre Glendinning, of my own unsolicited free will. If they desire it, I shall go, but no other power shall remove me except by violence, and against any violence I have the ordinary appeal to the law. Read this, madam, said Mrs. Tartan, tremblingly handing it to Isabel, and eyeing her with a passionate and disdainful significance. I have read it, said Isabel quietly after a glance, and handing it to Pierre, as if by that act to show that she had no separate decision in the matter. And do you, sir, too indirectly connive? Said Mrs. Tartan to Pierre when he had read it. I render no accounts, madam. This seems to be the written and final calm will of your daughter. As such, you had best respect it and depart. Mrs. Tartan glanced despairingly and incensely about her. Then fixing her eyes on her daughter, spoke. Girl, here where I stand, I forever cast thee off. Never more shalt thou be vexed by my maternal entreaties. I shall instruct thy brothers to disown thee. I shall instruct Glen Stanley to banish thy worthless image from his heart, if banished thence it be not already by thine own incredible folly and depravity. For thee, Mr. Monster, the judgment of God will overtake thee for this. And for thee, madam, I have no words for the woman who will connivingly permit her own husband's paramour to dwell beneath her roof. For thee, frail one, to Delhi, thou needest no amplification, a nest of vileness, and now, surely, whom God himself hath abandoned forever, a mother may quit, never more to revisit. This parting maternal malediction seemed to work no visibly corresponding effect upon Lucy. Already she was so marble-white that fear could no more blanch her, if indeed fear was then at all within her heart. For as the highest and purest and thinnest ether remains unvexed by all the tumults of the inferior air, so that transparent ether of her cheek, that clear mild azure of her eye, showed no sign of passion, as her terrestrial mother stormed below. Helping she had from unstirring arms, glimpses she caught of aid invisible. Sustained she was by those high powers of immortal love, that once siding with the weakest reed which the utmost tempest tosses, then that utmost tempest shall be broken down before the irresistible resistings of that weakest reed. Book 25. Lucy, Isabel, and Pierre. Pierre at his book. Enceladus by Herman Melville. Chapter 1. A day or two after the arrival of Lucy, when she had quite recovered from any possible ill effects of recent events conveying such a shock to both Pierre and Isabel, though to each in a quite different way, but not, apparently at least, moving Lucy so intensely. As they were all three sitting at coffee, Lucy expressed her intention to practice her crayon art professionally. It would be so pleasant an employment for her, besides contributing to their common fund. Pierre well knew her expertness in catching likenesses and judiciously and truthfully beautifying them, not by altering the features so much as by steeping them in a beautifying atmosphere. For even so, said Lucy, thrown into the lagoon and there beheld, as I have heard, the roughest stones without transformation, put on the softest aspects. If Pierre would only take a little trouble to bring sitters to her room, she doubted not a fine harvest of heads might easily be secured. Certainly, among the numerous inmates of the old church, Pierre must know many who would have no objections to being sketched. Moreover, though as yet she had had small opportunity to see them, yet among such a remarkable company of poets, philosophers, and mystics of all sorts, there must be some striking heads. In conclusion, she expressed her satisfaction at the chamber prepared for her, inasmuch as having been formerly the studio of an artist, one window had been considerably elevated, while by a singular arrangement of the interior shutters, the light could in any direction be thrown about at will. Already Pierre had anticipated something of this sort, the first sight of the easel having suggested it to him. His reply was therefore not wholly unconsidered. He said that so far as she herself was concerned, the systematic practice of her art at present would certainly be a great advantage in supplying her with a very delightful occupation. But since she could hardly hope for any patronage from her mother's fashionable and wealthy associates, indeed, as such a thing must be very far from her own desires, and as it was only from the apostles she could, for some time to come, at least reasonably anticipate sitters, and as those apostles were almost universally a very forlorn and penniless set, though in truth there were some wonderfully rich-looking heads among them, therefore, Lucy must not look for much immediate pecuniary emolument. Ere long she might indeed do something very handsome, but at the outset it was well to be moderate in her expectations. This admonishment came, modifiedly, from that certain stoic, dogged mood of Pierre, born of his recent life, which taught him never to expect any good from anything, but always to anticipate ill, however not in unreadiness to meet the contrary, and then, if good came, so much the better. He added that he would that very morning go among the rooms and corridors of the apostles, familiarly announcing that his cousin, a lady artist in crayons, occupied a room adjoining his, where she would be very happy to receive any sitters. And now, Lucy, what shall be the terms? That is a very important point, thou knowest. I suppose, Pierre, they must be very low, said Lucy, looking at him meditatively. Very low, Lucy. Very low indeed. Well, $10, then. 10 banks of England, Lucy, exclaimed Pierre. Why, Lucy, that were almost a quarter's income for some of the apostles. For dollars, Pierre. I will tell thee now, Lucy. But first, how long does it take to complete one portrait? 2 sittings, and 2 mornings' work by myself, Pierre. And let me see, what are thy materials? They are not very costly, I believe. 'Tis not like cutting glass? Thy tools must not be pointed with diamonds, Lucy? See, Pierre, said Lucy, holding out her little palm. See, this handful of charcoal, a bit of bread, a crayon or 2, and a square of paper, that is all. Well, then, thou shalt charge $1.75 for a portrait. Only $1.75, Pierre? I am half afraid now we have set it far too high, Lucy. Thou must not be extravagant. Look, if thy terms were $10 and thou didst crayon on trust, then thou wouldst have plenty of sitters but small returns. But if thou puttiest thy terms right down and also sayest thou must have thy cash right down too, don't start so at that cash, then not so many sitters to be sure but more returns. Thou understandest. It shall be just as thou sayst, Pierre. Well, then, I will write a card for thee, stating thy terms, and put it up conspicuously in thy room, so that every apostle may know what he has to expect. Thank thee, cousin Pierre, said Lucy, rising. I rejoice at thy pleasant and not entirely unhopeful view of my poor little plan. But I must be doing something. I must be earning money. See, I have eaten ever so much bread this morning, but have not earned 1 penny. With a humorous sadness Pierre measured the large remainder of the one only piece she had touched, and then would have spoken banteringly to her, but she had slid away into her own room. He was presently roused from the strange reverie into which the conclusion of this scene had thrown him, by the touch of Isabel's hand upon his knee, and her large expressive glance upon his face. During all the foregoing colloquy, she had remained entirely silent, but an unoccupied observer would perhaps have noticed that some new and very strong emotions were restrainedly stirring within her. "Pierre," she said, intently bending over toward him. "Well, well, Isabel," stammeringly replied Pierre, while a mysterious color suffused itself over his whole face, neck and brow, and involuntarily he started a little back from her self-proffering form. Arrested by this movement, Isabel eyed him fixedly, then slowly rose, and with immense mournful stateliness, drew herself up and said, "If thy sister can ever come too nigh to thee, Pierre, tell thy sister so beforehand. For the September sun draws not up the valley vapor more jealously from the disdainful earth, than my secret God shall draw me up from thee, if ever I can come too nigh to thee." Thus speaking, one hand was on her bosom, as if resolutely feeling of something deadly there concealed. But, riveted by her general manner more than by her particular gesture, Pierre, at the instant, did not so particularly note the all-significant movement of the hand upon her bosom, though afterward he recalled it, and darkly and thoroughly comprehended its meaning. "Too nigh to me, Isabel? Sun or dew? Thou fertilizest me. Can sunbeams or drops of dew come too nigh the thing they warm and water? Then sit down by me, Isabel, and sit close. Wind in within my ribs, if so thou canst, that my one frame may be the continent of two. Fine feathers make fine birds, so I have heard," said Isabel most bitterly. "But do fine sayings always make fine deeds? Pierre, thou didst but just now draw away from me. When we would most dearly embrace, we first throw back our arms, Isabel. I but drew away to draw so much the closer to thee. Well, all words are errant skirmishers. Deeds are the army's self. Be it as thou sayest. I yet trust to thee, Pierre. My breath waits thine. What is it, Isabel? I have been more blockish than a block. I am mad to think of it, more mad, that her great sweetness should first remind me of mine own stupidity. But she shall not get the start of me. Pierre, some way I must work for thee. See, I will sell this hair, have these teeth pulled out, but some way I will earn money for thee." Pierre now eyed her startledly. Touches of a determinate meaning shone in her. Some hidden thing was deeply wounded in her. An affectionate, soothing syllable was on his tongue. His arm was out, when, shifting his expression, he whisperingly and alarmedly exclaimed, "Hark! She is coming. Be still." But rising boldly, Isabel threw open the connecting door, exclaiming half hysterically, "Look, Lucy! Here is the strangest husband, fearful of being caught speaking to his wife, with an artist's little box before her, whose rattling, perhaps, had startled Pierre." Lucy was sitting midway in her room, opposite the open door, so that at that moment, both Pierre and Isabel were plainly visible to her. The singular tone of Isabel's voice instantly caused her to look up intently. At once, a sudden irradiation of some subtle intelligence, but whether welcome to her or otherwise, could not be determined, shot over her whole aspect. She murmured some vague random reply, and then bent low over her box, saying she was very busy. Isabel closed the door, and sat down again by Pierre. Her countenance wore a mixed and writhing, impatient look. She seemed as one in whom the most powerful emotion of life is caught in inextricable toils of circumstances, and while longing to disengage itself, still knows that all struggles will prove worse than vain, and so, for the moment, grows madly reckless and defiant of all obstacles. Pierre trembled as he gazed upon her, but soon the mood passed from her. Her old, sweet mournfulness returned. Again the clear unfathomableness was in her mystic eye. "Pierre, ere I ever knew thee, I have done mad things, which I have never been conscious of, but in the dim recalling. I hold such things no things of mine. What I now remember, as just now done, was one of them. Thou hast done nothing but shown thy strength, while I have shown my weakness, Isabel. Yes, to the whole world thou art my wife, to her, too, thou art my wife. Have I not told her so, myself? I was weaker than a kitten, Isabel, and thou, strong as those high things angelical, from which utmost beauty takes not strength. Pierre, once such syllables from thee, were all refreshing and bedewing to me. Now, though they drop as warmly and as fluidly from thee, yet falling through another and an intercepting zone, they freeze on the way, and clatter on my heart like hail, Pierre. Thou didst not speak thus to her. She is not Isabel. The girl gazed at him with a quick and piercing scrutiny, then looked quite calm and spoke. My guitar, Pierre, thou knowst how complete a mistress I am of it. Now, before thou gettest sitters for the portrait sketcher, thou shalt get pupils for the music teacher. Wilt thou? And she looked at him with a persuasiveness and touchingness, which to Pierre seemed more than mortal. My poor Isabel, cried Pierre. Thou art the mistress of the natural sweetness of the guitar, not of its invented regulated artifices. And these are all that the silly pupil will pay for learning, and what thou hast cannot be taught. Ah, thy sweet ignorance is all transporting to me. My sweet, dear, divine girl. And impulsively he caught her in his arms, while the first fire of his feeling plainly glowed upon him. But ere he had yet caught her to him, Isabel had backward glided close to the connecting door, which, at the instant of his embrace, suddenly opened, as by its own volition. Before the eyes of seated Lucy, Pierre and Isabel stood locked, Pierre's lips upon her cheek. Chapter 2. Notwithstanding the maternal visit of Mrs. Tartan, and the peremptoriness with which it had been closed by her declared departure never to return, and her vow to teach all Lucy's relatives and friends, and Lucy's own brothers, and her suitor, to disown her and forget her. Yet Pierre fancied that he knew too much in general of the human heart, and too much in particular of the character of both Glen and Frederick, to remain entirely untouched by disquietude concerning what those two fiery youths might now be plotting against him, as the imagined monster, by whose infernal tricks Lucy Tartan was supposed to have been seduced from every earthly seemliness. Not happily, but only so much the more gloomily, did he augur from the fact that Mrs. Tartan had come to Lucy unattended, and that Glen and Frederick had let 48 hours and more go by, without giving the slightest hostile or neutral sign. At first he thought that, bridling their impulsive fierceness, they were resolved to take the slower, but perhaps the surer method, to wrest Lucy back to them, by instituting some legal process. But this idea was repulsed by more than one consideration. Not only was Frederick of that sort of temper, peculiar to military men, which would prompt him, in so closely personal and intensely private and family a matter, to scorn the hireling publicity of the law's lingering arm, and impel him, as by the furiousness of fire, to be his own writer and avenger. For in him, it was perhaps quite as much the feeling of an outrageous family affront to himself, through Lucy, as her own presumed separate wrong, however black, which stung him to the quick. Not only were these things so respecting Frederick, but concerning Glen, Pierre well knew that, be Glen heartless as he might, to do a deed of love, Glen was not heartless to do a deed of hate. That though, on that memorable night of his arrival in the city, Glen had heartlessly closed his door upon him, yet now Glen might heartfully burst Pierre's open, if by that he at all believed that permanent success would crown the fray. Besides, Pierre knew this, that so invincible is the natural, untamable, latent spirit of a courageous manliness in man, that though now socially educated for thousands of years in an arbitrary homage to the law, as the one only appointed redress for every injured person, yet immemorially and universally, among all gentlemen of spirit, once to have uttered independent personal threats of personal vengeance against your foe, and then, after that, to fall back slinking into a court and hire with sops a pack of yelping pettifoggers to fight the battle so valiantly proclaimed. This, on the surface, is ever deemed very decorous and very prudent, a most wise second thought, but at bottom a miserably ignoble thing. Frederick was not the watery man for that. Glen had more grapey blood in him. Moreover, it seemed quite clear to Pierre that only by making out Lucy absolutely mad, and striving to prove it by 1,000 despicable little particulars, could the law succeed in tearing her from the refuge she had voluntarily sought, a course equally abhorrent to all the parties possibly to be concerned on either side. What then would those two boiling bloods do? Perhaps they would patrol the streets, and at the first glimpse of lonely Lucy, kidnap her home. Or if Pierre were with her, then smite him down by hook or crook, fair play or foul, and then away with Lucy, or if Lucy systematically kept her room, then fall on Pierre in the most public way, fell him and cover him from all decent recognition beneath heaps on heaps of hate and insult, so that broken on the wheel of such dishonor, Pierre might feel himself unstrung, and basely yield the prize. Not the gibbering of ghosts in any old haunted house, no sulphurous and portentous sign at night beheld in heaven, will so make the hair to stand, as when a proud and honorable man is revolving in his soul the possibilities of some gross public and corporeal disgrace. It is not fear. It is a pride horror, which is more terrible than any fear. Then, by tremendous imagery, the murderer's mark of Cain is felt burning on the brow, and the already acquitted knife blood rusts in the clutch of the anticipating hand, certain that those two youths must be plotting something furious against him, with the echoes of their scorning curses on the stairs still ringing in his ears, curses, whose swift responses from himself, he, at the time, had had much ado to check. Thoroughly alive to the supernaturalism of that mad frothing hate which a spirited brother forks forth at the insulter of a sister's honor, beyond doubt the most uncompromising of all the social passions known to man, and not blind to the anomalous fact that if such a brother stab his foe at his own mother's table, all people and all juries would bear him out, accounting everything allowable to a noble soul made mad by a sweet sister's shame caused by a damned seducer. Imagining to himself his own feelings, if he were actually in the position which Frederick so vividly fancied to be his. Remembering that in love matters jealousy is as an adder, and that the jealousy of Glen was double addered by the extraordinary malice of the apparent circumstances under which Lucy had spurned Glen's arms, and fled to his always successful and now married rival, as if wantonly and shamelessly to Nestle there. Remembering all these intense incitements of both those foes of his, Pierre could not but look forward to wild work very soon to come. Nor was the storm of passion in his soul unratified by the decision of his coolest possible hour. Storm and calm both said to him, "Look to thyself, O Pierre! Murders are done by maniacs. But the earnest thoughts of murder, these are the collected desperadoes." Pierre was such. Fate, or what you will, had made him such. But such he was. And when these things now swam before him, when he thought of all the ambiguities which hemmed him in, the stony walls all round that he could not overleap, the million aggravations of his most malicious lot, the last lingering hope of happiness licked up from him as by flames of fire, and his one only prospect a black, bottomless gulf of guilt, upon whose verge he imminently teetered every hour, then the utmost hate of Glen and Frederick were jubilantly welcome to him, and murder, done in the act of warding off their ignominious public blow, seemed the one only congenial sequel to such a desperate career. Chapter 3. As a statue, planted on a revolving pedestal, shows now this limb, now that, now front, now back, now side, continually changing, too, its general profile. So does the pivoted, statued soul of man, when turned by the hand of truth. Lies only never vary. Look for no invariableness in Pierre. Nor does any canting showman here stand by to announce his phases as he revolves. Catch his phases as your insight may. Another day passed on. Glen and Frederick still absenting themselves, and Pierre and Isabel and Lucy all dwelling together. The domestic presence of Lucy had begun to produce a remarkable effect upon Pierre. Sometimes, to the covertly watchful eye of Isabel, he would seem to look upon Lucy with an expression illy befitting their singular and so supposed merely cousinly relation, and yet again with another expression still more unaccountable to her, one of fear and awe not unmixed with impatience. But his general detailed manner toward Lucy was that of the most delicate and affectionate considerateness, nothing more. He was never alone with her, though, as before, at times alone with Isabel. Lucy seemed entirely undesirous of usurping any place about him, manifested no slightest unwelcome curiosity as to Pierre, and no painful embarrassment as to Isabel. Nevertheless, more and more did she seem, hour by hour, to be somehow inexplicably sliding between them, without touching them. Pierre felt that some strange heavenly influence was near him, to keep him from some uttermost harm. Isabel was alive to some untraceable displacing agency. Though when all three were together, the marvelous serenity and sweetness and utter unsuspectingness of Lucy obviated anything like a common embarrassment. Yet if there was any embarrassment at all beneath that roof, it was sometimes when Pierre was alone with Isabel, after Lucy would innocently quit them. Meantime Pierre was still going on with his book, every moment becoming still the more sensible of the intensely inauspicious circumstances of all sorts under which that labor was proceeding. And as the now advancing and concentering enterprise demanded more and more compacted vigor from him, he felt that he was having less and less to bring to it. For not only was it the signal misery of Pierre to be invisibly, though but accidentally, goaded, in the hour of mental immaturity, to the attempt at a mature work, a circumstance sufficiently lamentable in itself, but also, in the hour of his clamorous pennilessness, he was additionally goaded into an enterprise long and protracted in the execution, and of all things least calculated for pecuniary profit in the end. How these things were so, whence they originated, might be thoroughly and very beneficially explained. But space and time here forbid. At length, domestic matters, rent and bread, had come to such a pass with him that whether or no the first pages must go to the printer, and thus was added still another tribulation, because the printed pages now dictated to the following manuscript, and said to all subsequent thoughts and inventions of Pierre, thus and thus, so and so, else an ill match. Therefore was his book already limited, bound over, and committed to imperfection, even before it had come to any confirmed form or conclusion at all. Oh, who shall reveal the horrors of poverty in authorship that is high? While the silly Millthorpe was railing against his delay of a few weeks and months, how bitterly did unreplying Pierre feel in his heart that to most of the great works of humanity, their authors had given, not weeks and months, not years and years, but their wholly surrendered and dedicated lives. On either hand clung to by a girl who would have laid down her life for him. Pierre, nevertheless, in his deepest, highest part, was utterly without sympathy from anything divine, human, brute, or vegetable. One in a city of hundreds of thousands of human beings, Pierre was solitary as at the pole. And the great woe of all was this, that all these things were unsuspected without, and undivulgeable from within. The very daggers that stabbed him were joked at by imbecility, ignorance, blockheadness, self-complacency, and the universal blearedness and besottedness around him. Now he began to feel that in him, the thews of a Titan were forestallingly cut by the scissors of fate. He felt as a moose hamstrung. All things that think or move or lie still seemed as created to mock and torment him. He seemed gifted with loftiness, merely that it might be dragged down to the mud. Still, the profound willfulness in him would not give up. Against the breaking heart and the bursting head, against all the dismal lassitude, and deathful faintness and sleeplessness, and whirlingness and craziness, still he like a demigod bore up. His soul's ship foresaw the inevitable rocks, but resolved to sail on, and make a courageous wreck. Now he gave jeer for jeer, and taunted the apes that jibed him. With the soul of an atheist, he wrote down the godliest things. With the feeling of misery and death in him, he created forms of gladness and life. For the pangs in his heart, he put down hoots on the paper. And everything else he disguised under the so conveniently adjustable drapery of all stretchable philosophy. For the more and the more that he wrote, and the deeper that he dived, Pierre saw the everlasting elusiveness of truth, the universal lurking insincerity of even the greatest and purest written thoughts. Like knavish cards, the leaves of all great books were covertly packed. He was but packing one set the more, and that a very poor jaded set and pack indeed, so that there was nothing he more spurned than his own aspirations, nothing he more abhorred than the loftiest part of himself. The brightest success now seemed intolerable to him, since he so plainly saw that the brightest success could not be the sole offspring of merit, but of merit for the 1,000th part, and 999 combining and dovetailing accidents for the rest. So beforehand he despised those laurels which in the very nature of things can never be impartially bestowed. But while thus all the earth was depopulated of ambition for him, still circumstances had put him in the attitude of an eager contender for renown. So beforehand he felt the unrevealable sting of receiving either plaudits or censures, equally unsought for, and equally loathed ere given. So, beforehand he felt the pyramidical scorn of the genuine loftiness for the whole infinite company of infinitesimal critics. His was the scorn which thinks it not worth the while to be scornful. Those he most scorned never knew it. In that lonely little closet of his, Pierre foretasted all that this world hath either of praise or dispraise, and thus foretasting both goblets, anticipatingly hurled them both in its teeth. All panegyric, all denunciation, all criticism of any sort, would come too late for Pierre. But man does never give himself up thus, a doorless and shutterless house for the four loosened winds of heaven to howl through, without still additional dilapidations. Much oftener than before, Pierre laid back in his chair with the deadly feeling of faintness. Much oftener than before, came staggering home from his evening walk, and from sheer bodily exhaustion economized the breath that answered the anxious inquiries as to what might be done for him. And as if all the leagued spiritual inveteracies and malices, combined with his general bodily exhaustion, were not enough, a special corporeal affliction now descended like a skyhawk upon him. His incessant application told upon his eyes. They became so affected that some days he wrote with the lids nearly closed, fearful of opening them wide to the light. Through the lashes he peered upon the paper, which so seemed fretted with wires. Sometimes he blindly wrote with his eyes turned away from the paper, thus unconsciously symbolizing the hostile necessity and distaste, the former whereof made of him this most unwilling state's prisoner of letters. As every evening, after his day's writing was done, the proofs of the beginning of his work came home for correction, Isabel would read them to him. They were replete with errors, but preoccupied by the thronging and undiluted, pure imaginings of things, he became impatient of such minute, gnat-like torments. He randomly corrected the worst, and let the rest go, jeering with himself at the rich harvest thus furnished to the entomological critics. But at last he received a tremendous interior intimation to hold off, to be still from his unnatural struggle. In the earlier progress of his book, he had found some relief in making his regular evening walk through the greatest thoroughfare of the city. That so, the utter isolation of his soul might feel itself the more intensely from the incessant jogglings of his body against the bodies of the hurrying thousands. Then he began to be sensible of more fancying stormy nights than pleasant ones. For then the great thoroughfares were less thronged, and the innumerable shop awnings flapped and beat like schooners' broad sails in a gale, and the shutters banged like lashed bulwarks, and the slates fell hurtling like displaced ship's blocks from aloft. Stemming such tempests through the deserted streets, Pierre felt a dark, triumphant joy, that while others had crawled in fear to their kennels, he alone defied the storm admiral, whose most vindictive peltings of hailstones, striking his iron-framed fiery furnace of a body, melted into soft dew and so harmlessly trickled from off him. By and by, of such howling, pelting nights, he began to bend his steps down the dark, narrow side streets, in quest of the more secluded and mysterious taprooms. There he would feel a singular satisfaction, in sitting down all dripping in a chair, ordering his half-pint of ale before him, and drawing over his cap to protect his eyes from the light, the varied faces of the social castaways, who here had their haunts from the bitterest midnights. But at last he began to feel a distaste for even these, and now nothing but the utter night desolation of the obscurest warehousing lanes would content him, or be at all sufferable to him. Among these he had now been accustomed to wind in and out every evening, till one night as he paused a moment previous to turning about for home, a sudden, unwanted, and all-pervading sensation seized him. He knew not where he was. He did not have any ordinary life-feeling at all. He could not see, though instinctively putting his hand to his eyes, he seemed to feel that the lids were open. Then he was sensible of a combined blindness, and vertigo, and staggering. Before his eyes a million green meteors danced. He felt his foot tottering upon the curb. He put out his hands, and knew no more for the time. When he came to himself he found that he was lying crosswise in the gutter, dabbled with mud and slime. He raised himself to try if he could stand, but the fit was entirely gone. Immediately he quickened his steps homeward, forbearing to rest or pause at all on the way, lest that rush of blood to his head, consequent upon his sudden cessation from walking, should again smite him down. This circumstance warned him away from those desolate streets, lest the repetition of the fit should leave him there to perish by night in unknown and unsuspected loneliness. But if that terrible vertigo had been also intended for another and deeper warning, he regarded such added warning not at all, but again plied heart and brain as before. But now at last, since the very blood in his body had in vain rebelled against his titanic soul, now the only visible outward symbols of that soul, his eyes, did also turn downright traitors to him, and with more success than the rebellious blood. He had abused them so recklessly that now they absolutely refused to look on paper. He turned them on paper, and they blinked and shut. The pupils of his eyes rolled away from him in their own orbits. He put his hand up to them and sat back in his seat. Then, without saying one word, he continued there for his usual term, suspended, motionless, blank. But next morning, it was some few days after the arrival of Lucy, still feeling that a certain downright infatuation, and no less, is both unavoidable and indispensable in the composition of any great, deep book, or even any wholly unsuccessful attempt at any great, deep book. Next morning he returned to the charge. But again the pupils of his eyes rolled away from him in their orbits, and now a general and nameless torpor, some horrible foretaste of death itself, seemed stealing upon him. Chapter 4. During this state of semi-unconsciousness, or rather trance, a remarkable dream or vision came to him. The actual artificial objects around him slid from him, and were replaced by a baseless yet most imposing spectacle of natural scenery. But though a baseless vision in itself, this airy spectacle assumed very familiar features to Pierre. It was the phantasmagoria of the Mount of the Titans, a singular height standing quite detached in a wide solitude not far from the grand range of dark blue hills encircling his ancestral manor. Say what some poets will, nature is not so much her own ever-sweet interpreter, as the mere supplier of that cunning alphabet, whereby selecting and combining as he pleases, each man reads his own peculiar lesson according to his own peculiar mind and mood. Thus a high-aspiring, but most moody, disappointed bard, chancing once to visit the meadows and beholding that fine eminence, christened it by the name it ever after bore, completely extinguishing its former title, the Delectable Mountain, one long ago bestowed by an old Baptist farmer, an hereditary admirer of Bunyan and his most marvelous book. From the spell of that name the mountain never afterward escaped. For now, gazing upon it by the light of those suggestive syllables, no poetical observer could resist the apparent felicity of the title. For as if indeed the immemorial mount would fain adapt itself to its so recent name, some people said that it had insensibly changed its pervading aspect within a score or two of winters. Nor was this strange conceit entirely without foundation, seeing that the annual displacements of huge rocks and gigantic trees were continually modifying its whole front and general contour. On the north side, where it fronted the old manor house, some 15 miles distant, the height, viewed from the piazza of a soft haze-canopied summer's noon, presented a long and beautiful, but not entirely inaccessible-looking purple precipice, some 2,000 feet in air, and on each hand sideways sloping down to lofty terraces of pastures. Those hillside pastures, be it said, were thickly sown with a small white amaranthan flower, which, being irreconcilably distasteful to the cattle, and wholly rejected by them, and yet continually multiplying on every hand, did by no means contribute to the agricultural value of those elevated lands. Insomuch that for this cause the disheartened dairy tenants of that part of the manor had petitioned their lady landlord for some abatement in their annual tribute of upland grasses, in the Juny load, rolls of butter in the October crock, and steers and heifers on the October hoof, with turkeys in the Christmas sleigh. The small white flower, it is our bane, the imploring tenants cried. The aspiring amaranth, every year it climbs and adds new terraces to its sway. The immortal amaranth, it will not die, but last year's flowers survive to this. The terraced pastures grow glittering white, and in warm June still show like banks of snow. Fit token of the sterileness the amaranth begets. Then free us from the amaranth, good lady, or be pleased to abate our rent. Now, on a somewhat nearer approach, the precipice did not belie its purple promise from the manorial piazza, that sweet imposing purple promise, which seemed fully to vindicate the Bunyanish old title originally bestowed, but showed the profuse aerial foliage of a hanging forest. Nevertheless, coming still more nigh, long and frequent rents among the mass of leaves revealed horrible glimpses of dark dripping rocks, and mysterious mouths of wolfish caves. Struck by this most unanticipated view, the tourist now quickened his impulsive steps to verify the change by coming into direct contact with so chameleon a height. As he would now speed on, the lower ground, which from the manor house piazza seemed all a grassy level, suddenly merged into a very long and weary acclivity, slowly rising close up to the precipice's base, so that the efflorescent grasses rippled against it, as the efflorescent waves of some great swell or long rolling billow ripple against the waterline of a steep gigantic warship on the sea. And, as among the rolling sea-like sands of Egypt, disordered rows of broken sphinxes lead to the Cheopian pyramid itself, so this long acclivity was thickly strewn with enormous rocky masses, grotesque in shape, and with wonderful features on them, which seemed to express that slumbering intelligence visible in some recumbent beasts whose intelligence seemed struck dumb in them by some sorrowful and inexplicable spell. Nevertheless, round and round those still enchanted rocks, hard by their utmost rims, and in among their cunning crevices, the misanthropic hill-scaling goat nibbled his sweetest food. For the rocks, so barren in themselves, distilled a subtle moisture, which fed with greenness all things that grew about their igneous marge. Quitting those recumbent rocks, you still ascended toward the hanging forest, and piercing within its lowermost fringe. Then suddenly you stood transfixed, as a marching soldier confounded at the sight of an impregnable redoubt, where he had fancied it a practicable vault to his courageous thews. Cunningly masked hitherto, by the green tapestry of the interlacing leaves, a terrific towering palisade of dark mossy massiness confronted you, and, trickling with unevaporable moisture, distilled upon you from its beetling brow slow thundershowers of waterdrops, chill as the last dews of death. Now you stood and shivered in that twilight, though it were high noon and burning August down the meads. All round and round, the grim scarred rocks rallied and re-rallied themselves, shot up, protruded, stretched, swelled, and eagerly reached forth, on every side bristlingly radiating with a hideous repellingness. Tossed and piled and indiscriminate among these, like bridging rifts of logs up-jammed in alluvial rushing streams of far Arkansas, or, like great masts and yards of overwhelmed fleets hurled high and dashed amain, all splintering together on hovering ridges of the Atlantic Sea. You saw the melancholy trophies which the north wind, championing the unquenchable quarrel of the winter, had wrested from the forests, and dismembered them on their own chosen battleground, in barbarous disdain. Mid the spectacle of wide and wanton spoil, insular noises of falling rocks would boomingly explode upon the silence and fright all the echoes, which ran shrieking in and out among the caves, as wailing women and children in some assaulted town. Stark desolation. Ruin merciless and ceaseless. Chills and gloom. All here lived a hidden life, curtained by that cunning purpleness, which, from the piazza of the manor house, so beautifully invested the mountain once called Delectable, but now styled Titanic. Beaten off by such undreamed-of glooms and steeps, you now sadly retraced your steps, and mayhap went skirting the inferior sideway terraces of pastures, where the multiple and most sterile inodorous immortalness of the small white flower furnished no aliment for the mild cow's meditative cud. But here and there you still might smell from far the sweet aromaticness of clumps of catnip, that dear farmhouse herb. Soon you would see the modest verdure of the plant itself, and wheresoever you saw that sight, old foundation stones and rotting timbers of log houses long extinct would also meet your eye, their desolation illy hid by the green solicitudes of the unemigrating herb, most fitly named the catnip, since, like the unrunegate cat, though all that's human forsake the place, that plant will long abide, long bask and bloom on the abandoned hearth. Illy hid, for every spring the amaranthine and celestial flower gained on the mortal household herb. For every autumn the catnip died, but never an autumn made the amaranth to wane. The catnip and the amaranth, man's earthly household peace, and the ever-encroaching appetite for God. No more now you sideways followed the sad pasture's skirt, but took your way adown the long declivity, fronting the mystic height. In mid-field again you paused among the recumbent sphinx-like shapes thrown off from the rocky steep. You paused, fixed by a form defiant, a form of awfulness. You saw Enceladus the Titan, the most potent of all the giants, writhing from out the imprisoning earth. Turbaned with upborne moss he writhed, still, though armless, resisting with his whole striving trunk, the Pelion and the Ossa hurled back at him. Turbaned with upborne moss he writhed, still turning his unconquerable front toward that majestic mount eternally in vain assailed by him, and which, when it had stormed him off, had heaved his undoffable incubus upon him, and deridingly left him. there to bay out his ineffectual howl. To Pierre this wondrous shape had always been a thing of interest, though hitherto all its latent significance had never fully and intelligibly smitten him. In his earlier boyhood a strolling company of young collegian pedestrians had chanced to light upon the rock, and, struck with its remarkableness, had brought a score of picks and spades, and dug round it to unearth it, and find whether indeed it were a demoniac freak of nature, or some stern thing of antediluvian art. Accompanying this eager party, Pierre first beheld that deathless son of Terra. At that time, in its untouched natural state, the statue presented nothing but the turbaned head of igneous rock rising from out the soil, with its unabasable face turned upward toward the mountain, and the bull-like neck clearly defined. With distorted features, scarred and broken, and a black brow mocked by the upborn moss, Enceladus there subterraneously stood, fast frozen into the earth at the junction of the neck. Spades and picks soon heaved part of his ossa from him, till at last a circular well was opened round him to the depth of some 13 feet. At that point the wearied young collegians gave over their enterprise in despair. With all their toil, they had not yet come to the girdle of Enceladus, but they had bared good part of his mighty chest, and exposed his mutilated shoulders, and the stumps of his once audacious arms. Thus far uncovering his shame, in that cruel plight they had abandoned him, leaving stark naked his in vain indignant chest to the defilements of the birds, which for untold ages had cast their foulness on his vanquished crest. Not unworthy to be compared with that leaden Titan, wherewith the art of Massey and the broad-flung pride of Bourbon enriched the enchanted gardens of Versailles, and from whose still twisted mouth for 60 feet the waters yet upgush, in elemental rivalry with those Etna flames, of old asserted to be the malicious breath of the borne-down giant. Not unworthy to be compared with that leaden demigod piled with costly rocks, and with one bent, wrenching knee protruding from the broken bronze. Not unworthy to be compared with that bold trophy of high art, this American Enceladus, wrought by the vigorous hand of nature's self. It did go further than compare. It did far surpass that fine figure molded by the inferior skill of man. Massey gave arms to the eternally defenseless, but nature, more truthful, performed an amputation, and left the impotent Titan without one serviceable ball and socket above the thigh. Such was the wild scenery, the mount of Titans, and the repulsed group of heaven assaulters, with Enceladus in their midst shamefully recumbent at its base. Such was the wild scenery, which now to Pierre, in his strange vision, displaced the 4 blank walls, the desk and camp-bed, and domineered upon his trance. But no longer petrified in all their ignominious attitudes, the herded Titans now sprung to their feet, flung themselves up the slope, and anew battered at the precipice's unresounding wall. Foremost among them all, he saw a moss-turbaned, armless giant, who, despairing of any other mode of wreaking his immitigable hate, turned his vast trunk into a battering ram, and hurled his own arched-out ribs again and yet again against the invulnerable steep. Enceladus! It is Enceladus! Pierre cried out in his sleep. That moment the phantom faced him, and Pierre saw Enceladus no more, but on the Titan's armless trunk, his own duplicate face and features magnifiedly gleamed upon him with prophetic discomfiture and woe. With trembling frame he started from his chair, and woke from that ideal horror to all his actual grief. Chapter 5. Nor did Pierre's random knowledge of the ancient fables fail still further to elucidate the vision which so strangely had supplied a tongue to muteness. But that elucidation was most repulsively fateful and foreboding, possibly because Pierre did not leap the final barrier of gloom, possibly because Pierre did not willfully wrest some final comfort from the fable, did not flog this stubborn rock as Moses his, and force even aridity itself to quench his painful thirst. Thus smitten, the Mount of Titans seems to yield this following stream. Old Titan's self was the son of incestuous Coelus and Terra, the son of incestuous heaven and earth. And Titan married his mother Terra, another and accumulatively incestuous match. And thereof Enceladus was one issue. So Enceladus was both the son and grandson of an incest. And even thus, there had been born from the organic blended heavenliness and earthliness of Pierre, another mixed, uncertain, heaven-aspiring, but still not wholly earth-emancipated mood, which again, by its terrestrial taint held down to its terrestrial mother, generated there the present doubly incestuous Enceladus within him, so that the present mood of Pierre, that reckless sky-assaulting mood of his, was nevertheless on one side the grandson of the sky, for it is according to eternal fitness that the precipitated Titan should still seek to regain his paternal birthright even by fierce escalade. Wherefore whoso storms the sky gives best proof he came from thither. But whatso crawls contented in the moat before that crystal fort, shows it was born within that slime, and there forever will abide. Recovered somewhat from the afterspell of this wild vision folded in his trance, Pierre composed his front as best he might, and straightway left his fatal closet. Concentrating all the remaining stuff in him, he resolved by an entire and violent change, and by a willful act against his own most habitual inclinations, to wrestle with the strange malady of his eyes, this new death-fiend of the trance, and this inferno of his titanic vision. And now, just as he crossed the threshold of the closet, he writhingly strove to assume an expression intended to be not uncheerful, though how indeed his countenance at all looked, he could not tell. For dreading some insupportably dark revealments in his glass, he had of late wholly abstained from appealing to it, and in his mind he rapidly conned over what indifferent, disguising, or light-hearted gamesome things he should say, when proposing to his companions the little design he cherished. And even so, to grim Enceladus, the world the gods had chained for a ball to drag at his o'er-freighted feet. Even so that globe put forth 1,000 flowers, whose fragile smiles disguised his ponderous load. Dear listener, we close the pages on another tale, a journey through words, imagination, and emotion. Here at the Falls Audiobook, where stories flow like a river's current, carrying you to distant worlds and uncharted depths, we thank you for joining us. As always, we invite you to linger a little longer. Subscribe to our channel to discover more stories waiting to be heard, each a cascade of voices, ideas, and artistry. And remember, every great story begins with a single word. Perhaps the next one will begin with you. Until our voices meet again, may your days be filled with quiet moments, rich pages, and the soothing sound of a story well told. This is the Falls Audiobook, signing off.